And I think that applies to certain things in Dharma also. The thing we struggle with the most, the line of scripture, the teaching that we struggle with the most is the key to the character, is the key to the teaching. So that's why I am going to go back to the analogy of the blind person, the blind man dreaming, as I called it, to go a little bit deeper in this difference between perceptions that do arise on the basis of physical faculties, sense faculties, and perceptions that arise only on the basis of the mental faculty. Because it's almost too easy, and this is the practical application, it's almost too easy once we hear a teaching on karma and think things are coming from my mind, created by my mind, to almost start to wonder, well, why do I need sense faculties at all? Because if things are really just like a dream, we've heard enough of that analogy in Buddhist context, if things are really just like a dream, then in a dream, and now I'm paraphrasing the mind-only analogy, in a dream, none of the physical sense faculties are working, but everything appears just fine. So if reality is just the same way, it's coming from my mind, it's coming from karmic potentials, even if I want to say those karmic potentials are merely labeled, see, we mix schools all the time in our day-to-day thought. Of course those karmic potentials are merely labeled, but the world's coming from my mind. Notice, I have to give you a little warning now. I'm jumping back to that view that's on the edge. Okay, karmic potentials are just coming from my mind. So the karmic potentials are producing my sense faculties, and they're producing the stuff that's out there. So why do I even really need the sense faculties at all? Because it's really just my mind. So why don't we just collapse all six senses into one? Because it's my trip. It's my mind world. And then we've just produced, I'm walking around in my dream. Again, from a certain perspective of the teaching, could be very, very correct. But right now, we're playing with the danger of that, because we do know that dreams are different from waking life, and if we don't somehow establish that for ourselves, we're not going to be able to believe our own view. But I want to really be sure you have the logic of that. If everything's just coming from potentials, and we leave out the idea of causes and conditions apart from anything but karmic directing of karmic potentials, then we actually don't need sense faculties or outer objects. The mind-only view makes sense to an extent. So the mind-only person, the supposed mind-only person, claims that just as in a dream, there's no outer matter, but mind itself emerges in the aspects of form, sound, and the rest. So too, in the waking state, there are no outer objects, but only the ripening of potentials into conscious awareness. Then, and now I'm quoting, why wouldn't a blind person who is awake, come to see physical forms and the rest just as well as someone who's not blind? If you don't need faculties, if you don't need sense faculties, and it's all just coming from karma. Because in both the dream and the waking state, they are exactly the same in not having an eye faculty. And furthermore, if, without form and the rest, i.e. the objects, consciousness could begin through its own nature, there would be nothing to distinguish a dream from the waking state at all.
Wouldn't you argue that the images in the mind of a blind person are the same as the images in the mind of a blind person awake, whether they're asleep or awake, because they have the same quality to them? So if I'm a blind person and I'm imagining a yellow cloud, whatever that means in a dream of a yellow cloud, and say I dreamt of that yellow cloud, would you say that blind person has the same experience in the dream and in waking life, albeit they can't see my yellow cloud?
That's what, let's see, that definitely is on the table. Is if the mind is producing the images and it's not relying on the sense faculty, then why can't the blind person be seeing the yellow flower when they're awake just as when they're dreaming?
No, they are seeing the same flower. They can't. When I said, do you remember your dream, that yellow flower, they go, yeah, and they're awake.
because they can remember it. Now, Cliff came up to me yesterday and said, there have been scientific studies of blind people who've been blind from birth and they don't dream. Now, I'm not so sure about that. You might have something else to say about that from the point of view of hearing. I don't think that's really relevant here because there's no specification of blind from birth, and it could very well be a person who has been blinded and definitely has all those mental images from having seen things. And then if you speak of past lives, you can say, well, they still have the mental images for visual objects, even if they don't have the faculty in this lifetime. I'm feeling more interactive today, so may I just hear your question, and then maybe I'll be able to integrate it.
Perhaps this is just a gross misunderstanding on my part, but I wonder if it's just that the perception of having a sense faculty is requisite. In other words, because in a dream you're having a perception that you have a sense faculty, which is having vision, and then when you're awake, you simply don't have the perception of having a working sense faculty, and therefore can't have the sensation or vision or whatever. Like, is it because I have a hard time accepting that dreams and reality are actually different? But that's probably just my.
No. This is. I love the fact you just said that, because then that makes this relevant. If none of us had that, if none of us had even tasted that, then this would seem really irrelevant as a discussion. But actually, both of what you said makes now I know there's reason for me to have gone back to this and go through it in detail. So if you can bear with me, I'll try to be clearer on what's at stake. What we're actually being called to think through here, and Jason Koppel will go into this in future, so that's why I know where it's going, is the difference between the mental image that arises to an I consciousness based on an I faculty and the image that rises to mental consciousness based on a mental faculty producing a visual image. And I'd almost say that the better you get at visualization and meditation, the more of an issue this becomes. And the better you get at dreaming, where your dreams are really, really clear, the more of an issue this becomes. If one doesn't have a strong visual sense with your eyes closed, then this will seem irrelevant as a discussion. But I think as meditators, we probably have seeds for vivid dreams. And then, not for me experientially, but for me as a practitioner looking forward to, okay, where would the path lead? I have, let's say, an imagined foreimage of what very stable visualization might be like, and why that's a goal within Vajrayana in particular, but also if you read the sutra teachings on reaching shamatha on a totally stable visual image. This texts say it's supposed to be as real as if you could reach out and touch it. And so the potential for misunderstanding, I'd say from Jetso Kappa's point of view, it's a misunderstanding. That, well, if everything is empty, and if things are being created by mind, then what's the difference between a totally clear visualized image and what I see in front of me? Because, and this is the line that keeps coming up, neither one is relying on a faculty, so we might think. And potentially the mind's-only school is saying neither one is relying on faculty, because the faculty, as you said, you articulated it beautifully, the appearance of the faculty is relying on the karma as well. So what is the difference? And all I can say with confidence is that Jetso Kappa affirms the difference more than once, because he clearly does not want anybody thinking that that which appears to mental consciousness as form is the same as what appears to the eye consciousness as form. And as one of the greatest meditators in the history of Tibet, I have to trust him that it's not because his meditation wasn't good enough. You know what I mean? He had extremely clear experience of vision appearing to mental consciousness. He had a lot of, this is where it becomes even more important for the path. He had a lot of visionary experiences. It becomes very, very relevant at advanced stages of Vajrayana to know the difference between a really good, stable visualization of a holy being and a holy being appearing to you because your practice is ripened into meeting a Buddha. They are vastly different stages of the path. But if one confuses the two, to I had a totally stable meditation and I could see Maitreya in my meditation, or Lord Buddha, Manjushri, however you say it, or visionary experience where you have encountered a Sambhogakaya of a Buddha. If you claim you've encountered the Sambhogakaya and all you have is a really stable visualization, this can lead to huge misunderstanding as to where one is on the path. And I'm just being strong about that because of my picture of the levels and paths. You wouldn't be meeting in Sambhogakaya until you're deep in the completion stage, perhaps have seen emptiness directly already. You can gain a totally stable visualization that looks real to you because you cultivated the visualization that way. And you can feel that presence as we've been doing in our own meditations. And Jetsa Papa says you should believe that the presence of the Buddha is with you. So we get subtle. What's the difference? You believe the presence of the Buddha is with you. You can see it as clearly as if you could reach out and touch it. And you've reached shamatha, so you can stay in meditation on it for 4, 6, 12 hours, as long as you wish. But that's shamatha. You might not even have completed the creation stage yet. You might not even have entered tantra yet. These are vastly different stages of the path from meeting a Sambhogakaya Buddha. So then it returns to the question, what's the difference? What's the difference between doing karma in a dream that will not bring a very strong result because it was only within our own mind stream, and doing karma in real life where it will affect another person's mind stream? Like, we've heard that teaching before about, well, actually, yeah, if you kill somebody in a dream, it's not good because you have seen your mind stream enact violence. It can be a very, I don't think I've ever dreamed that in this life. But I can imagine it would be pretty terrifying to wake up from a dream and have seen yourself do something like that. Well, you do not receive the karma for killing a sentient being. Master Shantideva says this explicitly in chapter 9. Let us finish this point. But the reason karma brings its full ripening when you do it in the outer world is because another sentient being whose own karma was ripening into their physical heaps. Remember the thing about the peacock? It's because a person saw that body as mine, that if you damage it to the point that it no longer breathes, you collect the karma of that being suffering. So we have to distinguish dreams from waking life, is what I'm saying. And both from the point of view of understanding vastly different levels of the spiritual path, where one's cultivating what it would mean to meet a Buddha, and from the point of view of knowing the difference between karmas that damage other living beings and karmas that are just within our own mind. Jayashu had her hand in person.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
So until you've had a certain realization of the nature of true reality, you're still seeing things in deceptive. I mean, you're still seeing segregation between yourself and objects, and lumping things together, and they feel so. They function in that way. So they say one of the things, helping a blind person to see, one of the things they say that you really need is a physicality interaction of this person who cannot see and identifying and understanding the world around them. That has to have a physical connection. You cannot do it without that element in place for this to happen. And so what I'm wondering is that the power of the karma to have the experience of seeing this body that you still very much see as the I doing an action, is it more of a matter of conviction, because there's still such a strong conviction that I am in this body, that the strength of the karma of doing something with my physical form, that at this stage I'm still very much calling me, would then have that power of hurting someone in the waking life opposed to hurting someone in the life of a dream, and where your experience body is different.
Right, and the physical body that you actually do associate it with for this life is lying in bed. It hasn't done anything.
So is it the conviction behind your connection underneath it all? Is it that you really have not unwrapped that trace around making a bundle out of yourself as being you?
My sense, just from, I feel so hesitant to speak personal opinion, but from everything I've read, meditated, studied, heard, and so on, is that the range of knowing that plants are karma is actually a lot vaster than our conscious awareness. There's so many cases that don't make sense if that's not true. Like, how can you plant the karma of killing bugs by walking through grass before you ever knew about about killing bugs being bad, A, and before you were even aware that walking through the grass could kill the bugs. And yet here you have this famous story of Arya Nagarjuna living 700 years, however long it was, and finally being sliced by a sword because he had cut off, decapitated an insect while cutting grass. Am I correct on that story? That's how I remember it. But I just remember it as being the great Arya Nagarjuna, in order to prove the infallibility of karma, allowed himself to be killed. Oh, I think it was Boy Prince, somebody who sliced his head off with a blade of grass.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Yes. He has power over life. He's virtually a Buddha, some high Bodhisattva level, and he says, "I can be killed with a blade of grass because I have created that karma in the past." Now, again, that may be a demonstration because he probably at that point could have purified that karma if he wanted to. But the point being, we plant karma at many, many levels that we're not actively aware of. How else could one, this always scares me, collect the karma of the killing of the country to which one belongs? Geshe has referred to that if you don't actively not support a war, for example, then at some level you are implicated in the actions of the collective group. If that works, even before we understand karma, much less when we do understand karma, it implies that our consciousness is already a lot vaster than we think. So how does that answer your question? Our consciousness in which the karma is imprinted or recorded understands the difference between a deed done in a physical body and a deed done only in a dream. And we don't have to reflect on that in order for it to be true. Is that enough answer for now? Because I do want to get back to this, but I want to hear what you're...
Yeah, related to that. In dreams, you said yesterday, and you're kind of living to it today, I feel, not having shared karma as much in dreams. But then how do you explain, like, advanced dreaming practitioners, say, interacting with another mind stream, or advanced lucid dreamers having a lucid dream simultaneously together? How is that not shared karma?
I wouldn't say it isn't. I think because of the ultimate non-boundariedness of consciousness, anything is possible. I mean, we wouldn't be here if at some level, we didn't believe that the potentials of consciousness are limitless. And yes, there are clearly lucid dreamers who don't have any particular background in dharma or emptiness or following it as this kind of a path. And I don't know the particular study you're referring to, but it makes sense to me that people could somehow show up in a lucid dream. And you mean they verify afterward that they had the same dream? Yeah. But look at the kind of telepathy that can occur between a mother and a child, or between a person and someone who's just died, like a parent or a partner who's just died and they hear a voice. I mean, I know a number of people who've had that experience of directly hearing the voice of that person after they've died and having no doubt that that was communication, that was direct communication between that person and themselves. So, of course, consciousness can communicate at levels other than physical presence. We know that. I mean, I'll let that be a given in this room. But for the people who experience the lucid dream together, they know there's a difference between that experience and having a conversation with each other in their bodies, right?
Yeah, of course.
So.
But then the shared karma idea.
Yeah, it's probably, well, and lucid dreaming is probably a lot more powerful karma than non-lucid dreaming also.
But still, shared karma in the dream world is, in a dream, is possible.
Shared karma in a dream. Yeah, I mean, I think if you had in a situation where you had two people lucid dreaming together, they could create karma together, but it would still be dream karma. It wouldn't be real life karma, depending whether they were able to affect anybody else. I think it's fun to get very, very pragmatic about if things are merely labeled, then at a certain level, everything is what it appears. I mean, it's not that it is what it appears to be, because then it wouldn't be illusion. But karma is planted based on how one understands something to be occurring. To an extent, because obviously, as I just said, karma is also planted based on things that we don't understand, but that still happened for somebody.
And then couldn't you also say that emptiness is also a label that you're putting on something?
Well, yes. I mean, that's a kind of a different topic, which I won't get into too much now. But emptiness is empty of inherent nature, which can be explained in a lot of different ways. When one is not in the direct perception of emptiness, anything one says about it is conceptual or labeled.
Right.
Mediated by means of a mental image, as Papa repeatedly says, Tin Chi. There's even the difference, and this is a whole other topic, between the lack of inherent existence we can all perceive about this object through conceptual analysis right now, but you still see the object, and that's what Papa calls a concordant ultimate. And ultimate reality that is the complete lack of all elaboration. So when somebody's in that complete lack of elaboration, direct perception, I would not say that that emptiness is a mere label, because they are experiencing something without labels, and that's why we can talk about the direct perception as being something that has meaning. But as soon as we're talking about it, yes, it's it. We ready to continue? This is good. I wanted to have a little discussion today, but sorry, there's just so much. I mean, you realize that this could go on for days. Where did I leave off, though? I said, yeah, if without form and the rest, consciousness could begin through its own nature, there would be nothing to distinguish a dream from the waking state at all. And that's this hypothetical situation where the mind really is creating everything, and sense faculties and objects are kind of an epiphenomenon, as they said. Garnish. And so the mind only responds to this issue, because they do have a response to everything. Chandakirti gives them credit for not being stupid. Is that the response is that it lies in the power and timing of the ripening of potentials. If the potential, and I want you to taste, how familiar does this sound? Is this the way we're thinking about karma? And if it is great, it means you're really thinking about karma. So then we can refine it from there. If the potential ripens, then anyone will see forms, whether awake or not, blind or not. And I think this is what you were getting at, Hector. If the potential is ripening, and the potential can produce the form, then it really doesn't matter whether you're awake or not, whether you're blind or not, because it's not coming from the faculties and it's not coming from the sleep. It's coming from the ripening of the potential. But if a potential does not ripen, no forms can be seen, even if wide awake with perfectly good eyes. And we've heard enough examples about karma, and you talking about people being able to communicate with each other in dreams, that we are ready for almost anything to happen. right? So the more we think, oh gosh, well, if the karma ripens, who knows? Anything can happen. But of course, according to this view, one would not even have eyes if the potential for eyes wasn't ripening. Because the mind-only school says that the eyes themselves are produced by the potential. Because the tendencies ripen into the object and the sensory faculty, according to this school. But in this case, the mind-only person does acknowledge that due to the condition of sleep, there will be only dreams. So they want to say there's a difference. They say, well, it's the blind person sleeps, so there will only be dreams. While visual images in general will not appear to a person with the overall karmic propensities to be blind when he or she is awake. But you notice it's feeling kind of, it's so loosening our idea of what it means to be blind. If you're saying, well, if the potentials are ripening not to have a working eye faculty while you're awake, then you won't have one. But maybe at some point that could shift and suddenly you have one. Now, of course, what comes to my mind at that moment is miraculous healings. So that too can happen. I'm thinking of the Gospels, a man born blind, his encounter with Christ. He says, put mud on your eyes. He puts mud on his eyes. And now I hope I'm not confusing two versions of the story. But at first he washes and he says, I see trees moving. It looks like trees are walking. And then he washes again. Oh, now I can see. And of course, that's interpreted in many deep spiritual ways as well. But I do believe there's such a thing as miraculous healing. So does that mean the potential just shifted? Karma just shifted? And suddenly the faculty is working when it wasn't working before? I'm not being sarcastic. I'm saying could be. The mind-only defender insists, however, that the cause for the difference between seeing images and not seeing images is not the lack of healthy eyes, but the lack of ripening tendencies. Again, this is really close to our view. It's not a matter of the eyes or not, it's a matter of the tendencies or not. And this is meant to be an example for everyone's life, not just the blind person. But the middle way debater is still dissatisfied, repeating the question of why the blind person would not be able to see forms just as well when awake as when dreaming if the forms were not coming from outside and the lack of forms was not coming from the lack of eyes and the dreams were not actually caused by the sleep. So what the middle way person in this case is interested in is actually not even so much, as I've been saying, the fact of karma ripening, but the why this now. That was our question from the retreat in March, if you remember, why this now? And we've heard, I hope, the teaching on the different weights and strengths of karma and how some karmas will ripen faster than others, given all things being equal, shall we say. And Jason Kappa writes on all that, so this is not what's at issue here. What I get from everything I've read in Jason Kappa, which is still maybe 10% of what he wrote, less than that, yeah, 5% of what he's written. Is there are certain layers at which karma has ripened that are very, very stable. And there are other layers that are the ones that are changing from day to day, month to month, year to year. And our bodies are somehow pretty stable. Subtle impermanence, of course. Changing every day, of course. But the mind shifts faster than the body, overall. And so this is what I was trying to say yesterday about the different layers at which it seems Jason Kappa, or rather, it seems to me that Jason Kappa's view is that karma is ripening at many different layers. And the layer of the sense faculty is different from the layer of the mental consciousness. And we're going to get to the quotation from which I take that directly in a moment. Not to mention all the things he says about Vajrayana, because it is so clear he sees that you can make vast changes in your mind and how you perceive. And then there's completion stage when you change your body. You don't change your body until the very end of the path, in the sense of fundamentally changing the way the body works. You have to do all this change in your mind first. Have shamatha, have deep insight into emptiness, have a completely stable meditation. Then you go inside the winds channel and work with the winds channels and drops to bring about change to the body. If the faculties worked at exactly the same level as the mind, it would follow that they would have changed long ago, because you've made such fundamental changes in your mind through this process of meditation. So maybe I realize that's one of the main sources that I'm getting that logic from. But it's also here. So I said, for the middle way debater, we have still not answered the question of why the blind person would not be able to see forms just as well when awake as when dreaming, if it's just coming from the tendencies. If the forms were not coming from the outside, the lack of forms for the blind person was not coming from the lack of eyes, and the dreams were not actually caused by the sleep, they were just caused by ripening tendencies. Then you could be having dreams while you were awake. You could suddenly be seeing and then suddenly not seeing. I mean, blind and then not blind 10 times a day. Like, the kind of things that don't happen. There are certain things we accept as being part of the way our world works. When somebody's faculties are damaged, they're damaged. When you break a leg, it takes a certain amount of time to heal. You know? And when one's mind is broken, it takes a certain amount of time to heal too. I don't deny that. Sometimes longer. So conversely, if the karmic potentials for seeing forms were not ripening when the blind person was awake, then why shouldn't it be the case that when dreaming there would be no such potentials ripening either? And I'm giving you a clue. The difference is mental consciousness versus visual consciousness. But we have to go through all that debate in order to almost have clarified why there's a difference. It seems the mind-only view has to provide an answer as to what really causes certain kinds of potentials to ripen at one time and not another. But if there were truly nothing outside, as in the typical mind-only view, then there could be no other causal factor whatsoever but one's own mind itself, i.e. the possibility for real interaction gets reduced to almost zero. But this would be problematic even for a faithful mind-only proponent to defend, as expressing the most profound meaning of dependent origination. And at another point, which we did cover a little bit in March, I worked on the view of profound dependent origination that Master Sangha presents in his Summary of the Greater Way. And he gives the analogy, if you recall, of the cloth dipped in dyeing vats. And you can't see the at a certain level of the dyeing process, you can't, I mean, as in the dyeing process, you can't see the colors because the chemical reactions haven't happened yet. But he analogizes that to the seeds in the foundation consciousness that haven't ripened yet. You can't see the content of karma until it hits the oxygen of the shared world. And he doesn't explicitly say the shared world, but he says of causes and conditions that come together and make those seeds come to fruition in all the variety of their colors. So if he's saying that in one of the integral or foundational mind-only texts, he never said everything is just a unilateral karmic ripening and we're all in our own bubbles. Nobody ever said that. And I will repeat that ad nauseum. But it's the fact that the mind-only person is trying to poke holes and say, but your view might lead to that if you follow it all the way, if you follow it to its extreme consequence. And this is where Tsongkhapa had commented, this furthermore is the way to encounter the thing to be refuted, the Gakcha. And here's the part I retranslated. So Chandakirti finally comes back, and Tsongkhapa glosses his answer as follows. Suppose someone claims that this not making sense is mere words, because the middle way person keeps saying, doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense. Suppose somebody says, oh, that's mere words. I don't quite understand this, but it says, then what we've already said is enough, as before. It's just like, we give up on you. But then he does say something more, or the Papa says more. Because for someone seeing dreams, he uses the phrase, seeing dreams. Just like the blind person when awake, one is bereft of a basis for consciousness, that is, the action of the faculty. So the blind person when awake does not have a faculty, a working faculty. Anybody when dreaming does not have a working eye faculty. And then he uses that same phrase, follows after, that I said before, the present moment ripening follows after the seed that was planted when a consciousness finished in the past. So he uses that technical phrase. What follows after in the aspect of a consciousness that depends upon an eye faculty called a potential is not something with a mental consciousness that arose from the transformation of a ripening potential for mental consciousness. That's the new version of my translation. I'm saying, okay, maybe we should do it in Tibetan, then it'll be easier. I'm serious, actually. I'm going to do this to you in Tibetan. You can see I'm getting loopy. Milam pongwan la ni sebi kapki longwa tar namshiki ten wampo jeba tam choi chir. Nubi ming chengi miki wampo la namshe tembe nambe jesi jeba. Ishi ki nopa member yongs yorwa le jungwe iki namshe chen mayeno. Okay, now I'm in a better position to explain this to you. The thing that follows after comes later in the aspect of a consciousness that depends upon an eye faculty bearing the name of a potential. That's called a potential. And what it seems he's using the language of here is this mind-only language that way back when we had Miki Lo, the mind of the eye, or the mind's eye, that has the name of a potential. It's a technical phrase, again, maybe translating something from Sanskrit way back. So in the mind-only school, it's the eye faculty has the name of a potential, i.e. the karmic potential ripened into the eye faculty. And there's a consciousness following after that depends upon that eye faculty, but that eye faculty is really only a potential. That's what I get as the meaning of that very dense phrase. Is not the same as, is not something with, something that bears mental consciousness that arose from the transformation of a ripening potential for mental consciousness. So essentially what I see Jetsa doing in this very terse, very difficult sentence, and I hope there are other sources elsewhere that I will find someday where he explicitly explains this. The chain of ripening of mental consciousness is not separate from, but is distinct from the chain of ripening of a visual consciousness. Of course they're related. We do meditation, as we did yesterday, on the field of the mind and its contents, and you hear a sound, try to find where this image of the sound stops and your mental image of it starts. I love Master Alan Wallace uses the image of the two piggybacking on each other. That our mental consciousness is the only one that can flow out to the senses. And so as soon as the sensory input comes in, it's sound consciousness into mental consciousness. They're really closely related. But why is it possible to remove one's mind from the senses altogether, as in deep states of meditation or sleep, and the mental consciousness can still work without the faculty? And this is the most explicit, as I say, still in very difficult form, but clear enough instance that I've seen where Jetsakapa says that which follows after the consciousness that depends upon an eye faculty, which in turn came from a potential, is not the same as a mental consciousness that arose from a transformation of a ripening potential for mental consciousness. So the chain of seeds that create mental consciousness is distinct from, even though related to, the chain of seeds creating visual. Do you think that's answered our overall question yet? I mean, does it give us enough tools for this debate? You wanted to say, oh, Jeff first.
metaphor you just used, is that akin to God's writing in prana?
At some level it would be. At some level I'd have to say it would be. Insofar, and now because the thought threading on prana is a distinctly tantric explanation. It's within our lineage here, so I'll speak of it in this context, but generally, just so you know, in a Galut monastery, they'd say, oh, that's Vajrayana, let's not deal with that here. Because it's like you have the circle around the sutra explanations in the mind-only middle way. But I'll just address briefly insofar as from a Vajrayana point of view. And at that point, when Tsongkhapa writes about such things, he's only in the middle way view. He doesn't accept mind-only for Vajrayana. He refers to it sometimes, and he pays great honor to the mind-only commentators on Vajrayana texts, but if he's teaching his own disciples, he says you have to have a middle way view. So if he's referring to pranas coming, like moving through the channels to the sense faculties, that's associated with karmic winds. Those karmic winds do ripen into experiences of sense faculties. This is now a Vajrayana explanation. So you do have sense faculties ripening in close association with karmic winds. And actually, in thinking this through, that was a help to me in understanding this whole situation. Because what it says to me is the karmic winds associated with the sense faculty are distinct from the karmic winds associated with the mental faculty. They can work very closely together. Now I'm not speaking of mind and winds being in tandem. I'm talking about two different winds, distinct flows of energy. And you can feel it, in meditation, once you get sensitive, you actually can feel the pranas moving to your sense faculties. And so that doesn't seem so abstract as an explanation. It's like you understand, oh, there's prana behind my eyes right now. They may be closed, but that's the same prana that's being activated when I see. And I would imagine that for a blind person, the way that the pranas run to the faculty is different. At a really subtle level. Now I'm way beyond my depth. But what the biologist would call the rods and cones in the eye, the Vajrayana yogi would say are extremely subtle vibrations of prana that are either able to interact with the pranas associated with the reflections of light associated with all the objects, and that there's some kind of interaction of pranas that then the consciousness is able to understand in a certain way. And that process of interaction with inner and outer pranas is quite distinct from the interaction of pranas upon which mental consciousness rides.
So, talking of inner and outer,
Yeah.
and describing the middle way, using the Gardner's understanding of consciousness as being ignorance and a tendency toward consciousness, and that the thoughts come from that, is vibration and energy, and moving from the faster moving mind to slower moving, as you described before, in terms of coarseness.
Mm-hmm.
Are you describing pranas and winds as being the intermediary between the middle way description of external form and an understanding of that as thought and consciousness arising from that?
It's hard for me to be sure that I understand what's in, I can't understand exactly what's in your mind behind your words right now, and obviously we're discussing something subtle, so I'll just do my best to go a little further in the outlandish idea I was just saying. Because at a certain point, it's both that I haven't read those texts yet, And I think some of these things, they just aren't explained in very much detail, because by the time you're ready to understand it, you're the yogi who can feel it, so you don't need texts for it. So that's why I'm on very tenuous ground now. But it is true that in the Gurya Samaj or completion stage texts, which are attributed, it's a lineage of texts actually attributed to Arya Nagarjuna. There's a big debate as to whether it's the same person or because they show up 700 years later. But I think there's a lot of meaning that they're attributed to Arya Nagarjuna, because the tradition is trying to say this is the same person and same view who taught the middle way, who taught about, who then is teaching about extremely subtle winds. And it is said explicitly that all the worlds arise from extremely subtle wind of mind. Now, what was clarified for me in classes at Gita, so this is based on 600 years of Gelug tradition in particular, since Joseph Kapo, wind and mind at the extremely subtle level are said to be of the same essence. They're one thing seen in two different ways. One as motility, one as knowing. Clear and aware. Clear and knowing, transparent and knowing, that's the consciousness aspect. Light and moving, very, very subtle form of wind, that's the wind aspect. But at the extremely subtle level, they're not just inseparable from each other, they are one thing understood according to two different conceptual isolates, i.e. two ways in which they're the opposite of everything they're not. But at the subtle level, which would be the 5 primary winds and the 5 secondary winds, for those of you who are familiar with those. Those are not of the same essence as consciousness. They're closely associated with consciousness, but they're not. I remember my teacher very specifically saying, they're not ngochi, they're not the same essence at that time. And then at the course level, so the subtle level of mind are the 80 misconceptions. The subtle level of winds are the primary and secondary winds. But then at the course level, they are quite distinct. As we know, our breath and our thoughts are not exactly the same. Our breath, and I remember actually being quite surprised by this for a long time. There were times that I thought, my breath is really, really slow, and my mind is all over the place. Or vice versa. Our breath might be agitated. We might be exercising, doing yoga, working really hard, and there's stillness in our mind. Like the coarse level of consciousness. Sometimes, and for those of us who are practicing yoga and trying to work on this correlation of winds and mind, has this ever come up as a conundrum? Like, yeah, I know they're related, but they're not exactly the same. And certainly my coarse breath, so the coarse form of wind is the breath that passes through our nostrils, is not the same as my thoughts. Because my thoughts are not going out my nostrils and coming back in my nostrils. Even when I'm meditating on mindfulness of breathing, my thoughts are not identical to that passage of coarse wind. So this was helpful for me to start to recognize, oh, when we say they're the same essence, that's the extremely subtle layer. When we say they're closely connected, that's the subtle layer. At the level of coarse breath and coarse mind, of course, the yoga we do will affect our thinking and will open channels and enable us to think better, but they're not exactly the same thing. That does not in any way mitigate the idea, or mitigate, I don't know if that's a fancy word, but it does not lessen the idea that karmic winds are working all the time. This I also checked with. It was great to be able to, on a few occasions, have a direct conversation with the very high and highly educated Tibetan Lama about these things. When I asked about karmic winds, he said, oh, of course. He used this word for each. For every single one of the karmas, there is a wind. There's each wind. And so in that case, yes, there would be karmic winds moving to the sense faculties all the time, manifesting that which that faculty is able to take in. And now I'm jumping to what I see to be one of the crux of this entire teaching. Karma is actually producing the outer world for all of us. It's not that it's just our mind projecting the outer world and our minds don't interact. It's that if you get down to it in a middle way view, supplemented by a Vajrayana view, this very earth element of the outer world that we're interacting with is being produced by karmic winds, which are shared. So there are karmic winds coming out of every single one of us to produce a physical element that we can stand on. And I think that's what Jetsukappā means when he says a vessel is produced by the collective karmic energies of all the beings who live there. And the elements are something that don't have feeling. They're not consciousness. At the level of pure world, they may be embodied by holy beings who represent those elements. But as we experience it now, the elements are not conscious.
And you're comfortable with combining worldviews on that?
You know, the only reason I am is because of the way that Jetsukappā quotes sutra in a Vajrayana context. He does not quote tantra in a sutra context for the most part. So yes, traditionally, as I said, if we were in a strict Gelugpa Sarah monastery class right now and you brought that question, the lot was sort of like, let's not deal with that now. But because we're having this class in a room where I know for a fact there have been more than a decade here, right? Yeah, of yoga classes teaching the union of winds and mind and the interaction of thoughts and winds, I think it is appropriate to speak up here. And as I say, the number of times I saw Jetsukappā referring to explicitly sutra explanations in his Vajrayana commentaries made me appreciate how he did not see those worlds to be discontinuous at all. He's quoting Abhidharma in order to support Grace Samaja. So in my own personal moment of understanding, which will continue to change, the explanation that makes the most sense to me is to say it's a different set of winds that go to the sense faculty than arise for the mental consciousness. The winds may be closely related, and the mental consciousness thoughts may be closely related to the eye consciousness thoughts. Those are both being consciousness. At that point, as I said, I wouldn't say that winds and mind are of the same essence, but they're closely related. You can even say that the eye consciousness awareness is riding on the wind that's going to the eye faculty. That I feel pretty confident saying. The karmic wind that is going to the eye faculty, the eye consciousness is riding on that wind. The mental faculty, as we know, is non-local. It can actually go anywhere. That's why you can have meditations where potentially you could see all three realms, because the mental faculty is not located in physical space, but it is associated with winds, pranas, that are, as long as we are embodied in this body, are located in physical space. And back to something you said about as long as we associate with this body, there's a very specific teaching at an advanced level of completion stage where it talks about actually rupturing the relationship between consciousness and the extreme and the subtle winds, I want to say the subtle winds of this particular body. And that the advanced yogi has to be able to do that in order to realize the clear light, in order to realize the illusory body, because you can't even associate at the subtle level with this heap of stuff anymore, this conglomeration of elements, in order to gain those realizations. But if it, as I say, again, my logic or my thinking about it, to get that far in the path and it's still so hard to rupture that continuum, it means that at the level we're at, we can't just think anything we want and shift it. And we've figured that out by now. But to me, one of the points of this teaching is to take very seriously and with great respect the stability of the karmas that are producing the experience of our embodied existence. And that when we are not healthy, it's because something really serious is happening in the configuration of karmic winds that are affecting the sense faculty winds, and the sense faculty can, in the Buddhist context, can apply to the luce is the entire body consciousness, and so that can include all of the internal organs and the whole body. Like the body consciousness ends up being the most pervasive one, and then the ears, eyes, nose, and so on. And so both to respect health at that level and physicality at that level, and somehow not to think that, well, because things are empty and I can think of my body differently, then suddenly my body should do something differently. To respect how, yeah, our minds can move a lot faster, change a lot faster, sometimes, than our physical bodies. Can you manage 10 more minutes and then we'll be the same schedule as yesterday? Can it wait, or is it so relevant right now? Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
You described consciousness as knowing in a
Yeah.
pure sense. Like Arjuna described consciousness in terms of ignorance. In that the winds provide. I tried to keep the words and they kind of slipped away.
Do you know what source you're referring to right now?
In your response to when you were first describing that process of prana and thoughts, right? But that they were related in that they were the opposite of what the other was not.
Yes.
Is how you describe those
Well,
two?
I used a very technical phrase, the conceptual isolate, which just has to do with defining something. So they're the same at the extremely subtle level. They're the same essence defined in two different ways. But at this subtle level, you can't necessarily say they're exactly the same.
So in the extremely subtle, by that definition, the sense of knowing, is that still consciousness, or is consciousness only at the subtle level? Because if consciousness is the result of ignorance and tendencies, does that not fall away at the very subtle level?
Yeah, you're right. You're very, very perceptive. The definition of awareness, whether coarse or subtle, samsaric or enlightened, is Selshin Rikpa, that which is clear, could also be translated as luminous, in the sense that it illuminates that which it knows, and knowing. So as I said, I think it was to you, but somewhere over here the other day, it is possible to be ignorant in the sense of being veiled and misperceiving, and still be conscious in the sense of having a faculty that is luminous and aware. They're not actually contradictory. It sounds it, especially in Tibetan, because the one word is Selshin Rikpa, knowing, and it's clouded by Ma Rikpa, which is unknowing. These two words, Rikpa, Ma is just the negative prefix. So there's Rikpa and there's Ma Rikpa. And this is why in the Dzogchen tradition they can use the same word Rikpa, which simply means to know, and then call it pristine awareness, that is the fundamental, extremely subtle mind, that is deeper than the consciousness of sentient being. So the insight that you just expressed is at some level the answer to our question from the beginning about two completely different levels of mind. I want to try to say it in such a way that it'll be clear for everybody. And I'll need to come back to this in the afternoon as well. If all of us are who we appear to be, and are not yogis who have reached high levels of completion stage in this life, none of us have experienced directly extremely subtle winds and minds since the last time we died. Get what I'm saying? So extremely subtle winds and mind are something that actually in the normal life process only manifests in the death process, at the very end of the death process, which is known as the three of light, proliferation, and dark mirror attainment, and then the clear light of death. Now, in very weak forms, that extremely subtle mind could be awakened for a split second in going to sleep, in sneezing, fainting, other moments, as they say, when the central channel or the winds enter the central channel very briefly. But those would not be the full forms of the extremely subtle winds of mind. So to all intents and purposes, we do not have experience of extremely subtle winds of mind in this room. But all Vajrayana practices are, at some level, founded on the premise that that extremely subtle mind is always present, even if not active, and is the foundation for the possibility of both samsara and nirvana. So that's what I've been sort of hinting at all along. If you want, physiologically speaking, you could say it's wrapped up inside this extremely subtle drop inside our heart chakra. And as long as our karmic winds are active outside of that drop, extended to the sense faculties, we cannot be aware of that which is by nature awareness. That's what's so ironic about it. And yet it's so fundamental to religious view. There's something that is fundamentally aware. You can call it the mind of God, the divine mind, and we're not aware of it. Because of the clouding of ignorance. So, and I'm going to be figurative right now. It's as if there's this pristine light shining from the center of our hearts. But as long as our awareness is scattered outside our hearts, we can't see that light, even though that light is what's shining our whole world. And so energetically, then it starts to make sense why you would do so many practices, not just to withdraw the winds and the minds into shamatha, a state of stillness. And the state of stillness, actual shamatha, would be a place where you penetrate to the base layer of the consciousness which was produced by karmic traces for this life. So that, and this I'm now borrowing something from the writings of Drikgyal Rinpa, 19th century Dzogchen master. That's that subtle continuum of mental awareness, not the extremely subtle, but just the subtle version, which was projected as the karma of this life. Its nature is unawareness. Its nature is ignorance. It is part of the 12 links. So simply reaching shamatha would be, dare I say, the winds gather at the heart, but they haven't penetrated the indestructible drop yet. Like, you're extremely stable. It's one of the best minds you can have in samsara. And you can do a lot of work from there. But you are still dwelling, in a sense, even if very, very clearly and lucidly, in a mind which fails to understand reality. But it is a mind with which you can do vipassana and penetrate through and understand reality. This is the weird irony of mind and how complex mind is. even though it's supposedly clear and aware and there's nothing there. Right? But to penetrate even further takes vastly more virtue and intensive practice as a yogi to not just withdraw the winds into the heart chakra in a stable way that's a state of shamatha, but to energetically penetrate the indestructible drop, and in terms of experience, go into the complete dissolution in which the elaborations of all three realms appear to dissolve, because based on what we were saying yesterday, if all three realms are merely conception, and the conceptions ride on the winds, and those winds which misunderstand reality have withdrawn into the heart chakra, you can't perceive all three realms at that time. Now, on this point, and I didn't think I was going to go into this, but I'll follow the train of thought. At one point, I asked my teacher, Goethe, about certain visualizations where you imagine withdrawing all three realms into your heart. And I'm sort of under the impression that, well, at a certain point, all the things you imagine in Vajrayana will actually happen. So does that mean if all the worlds are actually riding on winds, as we've just been saying, as I've just been suggesting, and he agreed, yeah, the physical, I used the word for physical matter, and I referred both to my arm and to the table. If that is ultimately projected by extremely subtle winds in mind, and you're withdrawing all the winds into your heart, does that mean the actual three realms dissolve into your heart? I didn't say it nearly as well in Tibetan, but he did understand me. And he pretty much laughed. Well, since I did translate it, I'll tell you exactly what he said. All right, it's going to take a minute. When referring specifically to the winds that make up the physical matter of a yogi's body, or else the winds that form the basis of environments created by shared karma, Geshe Norsang said, those are not withdrawn. The winds that come in relation to each person's karma, the winds that turn the cycle of samsara, the winds related to each one's mind and karma, those are withdrawn. The winds associated with the 80 misconceptions, these are 80 forms of ignorance, are withdrawn. But the outer ones, the outer winds, that is, the shared ones, those are not withdrawn. Only the unique ones. So to me, this was an extremely rare opportunity and answer to receive, which is when a yogi enters the clear light, because that was the question at issue. It doesn't mean that the entire universe actually has to go into your heart, even as though it is true that the entire universe is riding on winds. The only winds that have to be withdrawn are the ones unique to that sentient being, which is why, with great confidence, I'm saying we do have our own karma, and we are made up of our own unique set of winds. And that's why a yogi's experience can take place and nothing happens to the rest of us. Because then when I asked specifically about the fact of this visualization, where you do dissolve the realms into your heart, he said, that doesn't take place. The visualization, yes. But if it were so, and then he started laughing, if there were anyone in the past who had finished withdrawing all the winds, then we wouldn't exist. Talk about an absurd consequence. You get it. If there's a yogi anywhere at any time in the past who has successfully withdrawn all the winds of the universe into his or her heart, none of us would be here. If that's real, you know, if...
Implying a self-existent.
No, I don't even mean self-existent. I mean actual. I mean as in, we're made of winds. 50 lifetimes ago, we were made of winds. If there was a yogi who had successfully taken everybody else, if there's a yogi sitting anywhere in the world right now doing that meditation, I'm not saying it's not possible for a yogi to withdraw the winds of another person into their heart. I'm actually not saying it's not possible. It might be, given the interconnectedness that we were meditating on today. But it is not what has to take place in order for a yogi to reach the clear light. Because there are plenty of stories of people who've done that. And they could have done it in the middle of a monastery. They could have done it in a cave with villagers nearby. People can reach the rainbow body. It's happened within the last decade, 2 decades. And people see signs of rainbows in the sky. They see extraordinary signs around the dissolution of a person's heaps. And they shrink down to just hair and fingernails, or not even that. But it doesn't mean that the whole rest of the world gets dissolved with them. And I did jump to this point, prompted by your beautiful reflection, because for me, sometimes answering it this way actually helps solve and made clearer what our issue was in the debate with the mind-only school. Because now we have this whole other element of wind, prana, not as in the gross element wind, but as in subtle prana. And then that whole other world of extremely subtle prana. To start to answer these differences. Oh yeah, the pranas are working really differently in a dream state than they are when I'm interacting with the world. And the karmas that are planted through, if you see how, as I said, not necessarily of exactly the same essence at the course level, but a person who's doing a very violent action, something wild is happening in their prana. Someone who's doing a very virtuous action, something totally different is happening in their prana. And the word karmic winds, or karmic energies, is ubiquitous in Vajrayana texts. And the idea that karma, as it's experienced through consciousness, as it's planted through consciousness, has a correlate in the physical world. And therefore the shared world. And this is what's so exciting to me. Of course we have a shared world of minds. We can have minds talking to each other. People can read minds. We can have clairvoyance. But the physical world can also be established as a shared world through physicality, not too differently than we commonly think. And that's that cool thing about the middle way, that so much of conventional experience is affirmed. Master Chandakirti is, pretty sure Chandakirti is famous for saying, I'm a farmer. I can do the same thing as all of you do. He's also said to have drawn a picture of a cow and then gotten milk from it, but that's a different story. I think it's time for us to break, but I just need to. Interesting. Oh, I have to pick up again. I just want to remember where we left off and see if there's any last thing I should say about that. No, I actually feel quite satisfied that that was where we were supposed to stop. Let's dedicate.
Kyoku Sunam Yeshe Sososhi Sunam Yeshe Rejun